Started. Morning everyone. Welcome to this webinar. This is our second webinar that we've run for the Fingal Valley and the Midlands. So today, what we're doing is we're going to be talking specifically about the forecast for the sites that we have in the Fingal and the Midlands. So Phil Graham will be discussing the outlook for the Fingal. So we're going to be talking about Benham. We'll be talking about Killymoon, Speyside, and we've just got a new site up in the Fingal Valley, which is at Royal George Crisp's property. So we'll be talking about those, and then we'll be talking about the Midland sites as well. So we've got several sites in the Midlands. So we'll be talking about Elsdon, Lewisham, Stonehouse. Any others, Phil? What else are we? You're on mute.
Chris's site.
Yes.
Rathani.
Sorry, Chris, we've forgotten about Rathani, so apologies. So we'll go through a bit of an outlook on the sites. Now, there's one or two people here who are a bit new to Farming Forecaster. So look, I'll just very briefly give a bit of an introduction to the project. So the Farming Forecaster is basically a decision support tool for graziers, and what it gives you is an outlook or a roadmap for pasture production and available pasture over a 3 to 4 month period. So you're able to have a bit of an outlook as to where pasture growth is going, and the particular focus is on the trends in the direction of where that pasture production is going. So that enables you, along with information about soil, moisture, and temperature and rainfall, to give you the ability to plan ahead, particularly in times of drought. So this is why we're working on this as a decision support tool. It's something that's come out of funding for drought resilience. We initially went to the East Coast Primary Producers Association with ideas about drought resilience, and it was actually their idea to pilot this tool in Tasmania. So it's about nearly 3 years ago we had that discussion. So on the back of those discussions, we kind of developed this pilot in Tasmania, and then that went really well, and we've got those sites. So those original sites are some of the sites we're talking about today in the Fingal and East Coast. And then off the back of that, we got some larger funding to do a statewide rollout of this tool. So Farming Forecaster is now a project that we're running across the whole state. NRM North and ourselves and TIA are partnering on the project. And so we have established a whole bunch of new sites, and we'll be continuing to expand those sites. So as it stands, we've got sites on Flinders Island, the Northeast, the Midlands, Fingal and East Coast, and we've now got 3 sites in the Coal Valley. We'll be looking at a few more sites in the Midlands, and we are just working with the guys in the Derwent to set up at least 6 sites in the Derwent region. We will also be having 3 sites in the Northwest. So all in all, we will probably establish nearly 50 sites across the state, which will provide a real network of information. These sites and the information that Phil will talk about is publicly available, so everybody can look at this information. And the 2 key pieces of information are the pasture forecast and soil moisture information from a soil probe. So it's 2 bits of key information, but I won't go into any more detail on the probe, but just to say that this is something that's providing a network of information around weather, environmental conditions to help manage dryland pasture systems. The reason that we're involved in this project is because it's I believe it's a really valuable tool for ground cover management, because one of the most fundamental decisions that people have to make is to match their stocking rate to their available feed. So for us, this is why we're involved. We feel like it's a really valuable tool, and it has public benefit because it's publicly available information. So all the sites that we're discussing today are sites that you can just go onto the website after this session and have a look at them. They're all available. So that's the idea behind it. So I will hand over to Phil. Just before I do, very quick introduction. We also have Marek from AgLogic. So Marek and Phil and I are working on the establishing the sites. So Marek's role is he's putting all the soil probes in and doing all the hardware side of it, the technical side, and Phil works on the whole tool and developing the system which enable the farm system which enables the forecast to be produced for each farm. And then we also have Nikki Barnes from TIA. She's helping us with a bit more of an understanding of how people are using this and other tools and what decisions they make when they use this information. So we're really keen to understand how people are going to actually use Farming Forecaster over the next year or two, and what decisions they're going to make. And we also have Pete Heading from North, who we're working closely with. So Pete and I are working on working with the farmers to get the sites established. So that's a quick introduction. So most of the people here will be aware of the Farming Forecaster. There's a good number of hosts of sites here, so we'll be discussing your sites. So I will hand over to Phil to get things going.
Thanks, Tim. Morning, everyone. For those people who might be new to Farming Forecaster, if you go onto the site, at the top there's a little line that says learn more about Farming Forecaster. And
oh yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Are you getting up the presentation, Tim?
I'm getting up the presentation.
Yeah, at the top of when you go onto the website, there's this learn more about Farming Forecaster, and if you go in there, there's little YouTube videos, 5-10 minutes, which helps explain each of the sections. So if you're new to it, I'm not going through that sort of detail, but you can go onto the site and pick all that up. Just waiting.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get the presentation up.
Obviously, the last week has made a big difference to what the outlook is like, and I started preparing some of this work a week ago, and I'm glad I was able to put that in the bin and have another crack at it, because it's we're in a more positive position than when I initially started. Next slide. Now, one of the things you can do is there's a blue button on the main screen called View Network, and I've just had to do some screenshots of that so we can see. There you're seeing three of the sites in the Midlands on the left-hand side, and the East Coast sites. 5 days ago, those two bottom East Coast sites were red, so they've gone from something like 12% up to nearly 50%. In the last week, which has made a huge difference. Next one, please, Tim. Now we're looking at the Fingal sites and the other Midland sites. And the new one is we've got the site up there at Lewis Hill, Lord Royal George, which has now come on board. One thing Tim didn't mention, while we've got a lot of new sites coming up, some of the old Midland sites which originally didn't have probes have been installed at those sites now, but we've got to let the probes run for a while before we get enough information to make sense of it. So for those landholders who are in those Midlands area, I'd suspect that maybe by July or August this year we'll have enough data to put up meaningful probe details for you. At present, you can already go and look at your sites on the AgLogic website. If you're having problems getting onto that, contact Tim or Marek. It's a very good site and you can pick up your details. So unfortunately, Rob wins the award for the only red site left in Tasmania. I don't think it's an award he wanted, but that's how it's gone. So let's start looking at that. So let's go to the next site. Next slide, Tim. Rightio, so the first screen that pops up, you can see up in the top right-hand corner, the drop-down box. So we're looking at Benham. And this was data I downloaded last night. So that probe data, I think I did it at about 5 o'clock last night. So that probe data was updated at 4 p.m. yesterday afternoon. You can see under the word probe and weather station, the last update 1 hour ago. So the top 10 to 60 centimetres, we've now got some moisture in the top 20 centimetres, but still a very dry profile at depth. And if we look at the buttons on the left-hand side, it's telling us that the soil moisture has improved over the last 30 days and 7 days, but we're down nearly 50% compared to where it was at the same time last year. And then on the right-hand side, we have the pasture forecast. We'll go to the next slide. I think I'll talk about that on another one, please, Tim. Next slide. So this is the picture of the soil moisture graph. We're still at Benham. You'll notice up the top it says compare to year. There's a drop-down box. What I've done is pulled up, I'll hit the previous year, and if you do that, next slide, please, Tim. You end up getting, gone too far. You end up getting 2 graphs instead of 1. So the top graph is of what's happened in the last 12 months. The graph underneath is what happened in the previous year. So you can just see the difference we've experienced this year compared to last year. And this is, I suppose, of all the sites, the one that's most stark in the changes that have occurred. But producers find that handy. And as years go on, you'll get more and more historical data you can look at. You can look at 1 year ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. Producers find that as a quick way to say, well, you know, where was I last year? What did I do? It just helps prompt your mind about what changes have occurred or not occurred. Next slide, please. So we're still on Benham here. The left-hand side one is you'll notice under the little box there's the button that says climatology. So the left-hand side we've got the climatology graph. On the right-hand side we've got the button is against the access graph. So what's the climatology? The climatology, we've used the last 30 years data to generate those coloured lines. So always remember, any shading on farming forecast is historical data from the last 30 years. So that shading shows historically where we would expect green feed to be at this site for this planting period. So the current situation is worse than average, but it's not as bad as it has been previously. There's been years when green feed didn't start to appear into the month of May. So that's climatology on the left. On the right-hand side, we've got the Access S button. So what's the Access S? Access S is the model that the Bureau of Met use to do their seasonal forecasts. It's the look into the future. The left-hand side is history. That's what rain has occurred and what temperatures have occurred. The right-hand side is a forecast. And there's 33 forecasts generated at the end of March that are used to look into the future. So what I want you to look at is how do those two lines, do those two graphs vary between one another? Yes, there are slight variations between the left and the right-hand side, but none of those variations are of large enough significance to say that the forecast is telling us anything different from what history tells us. So history's on the left, that's what's occurred, and on the basis of that, we're using that to project where things might go. The one on the right-hand side is the forecast, and it's not doing anything different. So as of the start of April, the forecast is adding nothing to our knowledge of where things might go. Now, I think Tim might have mentioned to Tim earlier this month, there was a real problem with that access data. You're right, Tim, we got a dud set of data sent down from the Bureau, and it was about 7 or 10 days ago when it was updated. So of late, we've had some problems with the Bureau sending us data at the start of the month. We're trying to rectify that, but that's just been it. So that's why, Tim, you must have looked early in the month, and what Access was telling you was looking absolutely dire. Well, that was a mistake and not reality. What you're seeing now is something that's a bit more worthwhile. Just the other thing I want to talk about is we've got the black tracking line, which if we just look on the left-hand side, sitting down the bottom. One of the weaknesses of grass grow, and it's always been there, and we're doing work to try and fix it, is that in reality, plants, perennial plants, break dormancy quicker than what the model says they do. So the science says plants are slower at breaking dormancy than they really are. So as I move around various locations, I'm always finding in autumn that this model is about 200 to 300 kilos of green behind what I see in paddocks. So Rob might want to make a comment later, but at present, well, I know because I was out Rob's way about 2 or 3 weeks ago, and there was some green in dryland paddocks, not much, a bit more than what that graph is showing. The other thing about that black line, it's updated every 7 days, so it is behind. So the effect of the rain that you would be seeing outside your windows now won't be reflected till that line is next updated, which will be someday this week. Right, so the black tracking line gets updated in 7-day chunks as we move through the month. So at present, you'll look at it, and then all of a sudden that black tracking line will burst into life at this site, and that's purely because it's done every 7 days. Why is it done every 7 days? Now that this site has got to stand on its own 2 feet, if we get it done every day, it costs us a lot more money, and someone's got to pay for it. So the decision was the updates to be done every 7 days. So I think everyone who's viewing today, the situation in your paddocks would be slightly better than what the black line is saying. Thanks, Tim. Now this is I just did some stuff independently and just set it down to Rob a while ago. Just because of the way that site was stacking up, and this is an on-farming forecast, and you won't see this on farming forecast. But I just thought I'd put it up to show the sort of things that are possible if things really turn pear-shaped. So you can see this work I did was back on the 17th of March through to the end of June. So the dotted lines are the historical values. So I can't do the fancy shading you see on the main website. So the red colour occurs between my red dotted line and the brown dotted line. The brown occurs between the brown dotted line and the black dotted line, and the green occurs above the black dotted line. So that's your historical data. And then you can see the forecasts below. So that was on the 17th of March when I did the forecast. So we're still in a dry scenario. That's what it looked like, and that assumed that the stocking rate stays the same through the whole period. So Benham's set up to run at a stocking rate of about 12.4 on the dryland country. Remember, for every site we're doing, what we're giving you is how your dryland country's performing. We're making no comments about what's under irrigation. On the right-hand side, what did I do? I said, well, right, things are getting tough. I'm going to make a decision that, and these are just random thoughts, I'm going to decrease the stocking rate on that dryland country from 12 down to 8. So I either put more country under pivots, or I put some stock in a drought lot, or I sell some stock. How you move from 12 to 8, there's a whole range of scenarios. But what I want you to do is just look at what dropping the stocking rate from 12 to 8 from that period in the 17th of March through to June, what it did to the shape of the lines. So taking 1/3 of the stock off So we've still got remaining stock on it. You'll notice that it substantially changed the response of the lines. The lines are increasing quicker because the difference between stock of feed eaten and growth is become more balanced, and the position that the lines end up at the end of June is looking more like the historical value, whereas on the left-hand side, you know, the red lines, the solid red lines well below the dotted red line, the solid brown lines well below the dotted brown line, whereas we go the other side, we'll see an improvement. So just that change in stocking rate, that's the sort of impact it can have on farming forecasters. So they're the sort of things that can be done down the track if we really get into difficult circumstances. Thanks, Tim. As I said, we've got the Royal George, Lewis Hill. Now this is a new site, so it's not up on farming forecaster yet. Hopefully the plan is in early May, this will be live on the site. But I just did this work for George, so he had some indications of what's going on. It's something he's seen before. So this was done on the 3rd of April. Again, the dotted lines are the historical positions, and the solid lines are the forecast. Now, George, you would have received rain just recently. So really what that rain's done is it's most likely meant that there's no way in the world you'd now be following either the red or the brown line. You'd be tracking more along the black line. So if we just look at, this is an interesting one, between the 3rd of April and the 17th of April, the lines really don't spread much. It's when we get to about the 24th that things start drying, that if things stay dry, the lines start splitting apart. That recent rain event just meant that split apart won't occur. So it'll continue. Come the 1st of May, when this whole forecast is redone, everything's reset, and the lines will be a lot closer together going out into winter, just because of the good moisture you've received. Next, please. I don't know if Tim mentioned, but we had a meeting with the producers in the Coal Valley yesterday. So I was doing this work on Friday, and I want you to look at the right-hand side graph. So it's the same as before. The dotted is the historical, and the solid lines are the forecast. So this site has only seen 78 mils of rain so far this year before the 15th of April. So with that 78 mils, that's what the forecast looked like. You know, the red and the brown forecast line are sitting, well, they're sitting down in territory where you'd have to start thinking about, I need to start doing a bit of planning. And interestingly enough, Ben, when we arrived at the place, had made a comment that he'd been on the phone about locking in some grain reserves just because how things were going. But then Saturday occurred and they got 14 mils. So on Sunday, I redid the forecast, and that's the one on the left. That's the difference 14 mils has made to this site in the forecast. Just look how the forecast lines have changed. The dotted lines are exactly the same. All that's changed is there was an extra 14 mils of rain come into the system. And the big difference is, instead of things dropping away on the right-hand side, you'll see how the black, brown and red lines drop away quite quickly. On the right-hand side, they in fact go up a while before they flatten off. So that graph got produced by accident, but it was one that actually the producers found very interesting yesterday. Next one, please. Now we're just ducking around and looking at some of the other sites in the valley, and we've gone east up to Speyside. Far more attractive profile of moisture down in that really productive area. You know, it's that top 40 centimetres, which is really what drives pasture production. So we're getting decent moisture there, and you can see that at this site, in fact, compared to this time last year, we're 20% up on moisture. We've had some improvement. Again, the forecast here is positive, and why do I say that? Look where the coloured lines are comparing the the equivalent in the historical position for the red 10% line is where the white and the red shading meet. That's the 10% historical value. So the red line is finishing at the end of July about the median position. So this is just positive. Whether you look at access, it doesn't make any difference.
Excuse me, Phil.
Yeah.
We might have to talk about the settings later, but that pasture forecast is probably not a great representation because we look a lot better than that.
Rightio, yeah. But now again, I can never fully. How would you rate the place now compared to history?
Average,
better than average.
Better than average. 70 top 75 at least. We would have an average ground cover of between 1,000 and 1,500, and our stocking rate is higher than what it says it is on farming, the pasture forecast.
Yeah, rightio. So when the black line when it gets first updated is most likely going to put you above average. So we're still a bit behind of where you're at.
Yeah, but we were above 500 kilos a month ago.
Yeah, we can't compare what your 500 kilos is like and what this model's like, because while we've used some of your data, we have not exactly modelled your farm.
Yeah.
Because your farm's made up of a range of soil types and a range of pasture types, and you'll make decisions with stock which I can't make. So I wouldn't get so hung up about the values on the left. It's where the forecast lines sit historically is the most important thing. So
yeah,
if I look at your site now, what I'm thinking is you're above average, and what you're saying is you're 25% above average.
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So that's the difference we're talking about. Not so much. I could go back and work in the model to get the numbers on the left-hand side closer to what you're at now. But in doing that, the where you're sitting historically, currently against history is most likely not going to change much.
Yeah. No, that's all right. I just thought I'd raise it. That's all.
No, thank you. That's great feedback. I think it's just important that people ask questions like that, because hopefully that helps people understand how you look at this information and make sense out of it. So in summary, from what John's just said, they think they're 25% better than what the model's spitting out. Now, if that's the case, that sort of difference should be something that sits there continually, right?
Yeah.
But thanks, and if you want to have a chat to me after, mate, send me emails. We can follow that up, but we might keep moving. But thanks for your input.
Thank you.
Next, please, Tim. We're up to Killymoon, and again, this is giving us. This is saying that this is most likely, John. This is about the position. Forget about the numbers on the left-hand side. But Killymoon's sort of saying to me at present, it's sitting at about 75% of historical potential, which is most likely what you're saying.
Yeah.
So there's also a bit of value in looking at a few sites. So you look at the Speyside site. You also go and look at Killymoon, and you put those two bits of information together. it helps. Maybe the picture off two sites might give you a truer one, but this Kelly Moon is in a very positive situation. And if we look on the left-hand side, that's also reflective of a bit more moisture in the soil, and most likely a bit more moisture early on, which is why things have got away.
Phil, if I could make a comment.
Yep.
It's exactly the same as what Jono said. Our green herbage could be another 1,000 more than is showing here, but your comments support just exactly what's going on. So it's been well explained.
Yeah, thank you. And just remember, with that black line, that's still, if you're looking out your door at present, that black line 7 days, where it was 7 days ago. So I wouldn't be at all surprised if when the black line comes up, you've suddenly chewed off another 400 or 500 of that difference.
Yep.
But I think the positive for both of you to take away from this is the trend for you is in a positive direction. We could spend half an hour talking about the actual amount, but the trend is what you want to know. That's the value in farming forecaster. It's the trend against history rather than the absolute green, and it's in very positive territory for both sides.
Correct.
Next, please, Tim. So we'll now jump over into the Midlands, and we'll start at the top and just come down. The radio Elston, we've got the black tracking lines kicking up a bit. Now, again, same comment as I made before. I actually drove past your place, Alex, 2 or 3 weeks ago and looked over the fence, and my view at then was that in terms of absolute values, you had 200 or 300 kilos of green earlier than what this is showing. So it's the same issue we talked about before. It's this breaking of dormancy, but the same problem sits in the historical shaded value as it does in the line. So this is most likely giving us a pretty robust view of where things are historically, and really what the black line's doing is it's sort of tracking along the 50% line. It's almost saying at present things are looking like you're going to get an average season compared to history. Forecast lines are a bit better. Again, remember, this hasn't taken account of the last rainfall event that came through, and I would suspect when we see that extension of the black line, it's most likely going to push up more to the red line, or more to the yellow line than anything else. But even if we look at the forecast as it's sitting, the coloured lines are sitting well above their corresponding historical values. So again, what's this telling us? The expectation is the forecast will give you a better season than what history you would have expected in history. I think it's the best way I can phrase it. Again, it's a positive outlook. Current growth rates are sitting at 17. I wouldn't be at all surprised when we see that only gets updated every 7 days. I wouldn't be at all surprised to see that figure moving up into the high 20s when that appears sometimes later this week. Thanks, Tim. Lewisham, in actual rainfall, it's very interesting. In actual rainfall, Lindsay, you've had the least rain of any of the sites we've looked at today. There's, according to my records, when I went into the Ag Logic site, your probes only recorded 81 mils for the year. So you would have been very pleased when this recent rains come. So we've got a similar sort of comment before, the black line's down the bottom. But again, if you look at the black line, it appears nothing's happening. But if you look up at the growth rate, 20 kilos a day. So just remember, what these lines are indicating is stocked paddocks. They're not paddocks that have been shut up. If a paddock is shut up, it would be looking a lot better than that. This is stocked paddocks. So even though it appears that the black line's tracking along the bottom, we are getting growth. it takes a while for that representation. That black line is in fact not sitting on 0. It might be sitting on, 50 or 70 or something like that. Growth's occurring. Because we've got stock in the paddock, we're not seeing all that growth. So it's the black line pulls away when the difference between growth and consumption gets a bit wider. And again, exactly the same trend as I've spoken before. I'd expect that black line to be shooting up along the yellow line next week or later this week when we see the next update done. Again, just taking that forecast as it sits right today. If we look where the red line ends up, it ends up tracking a bit better than its historical equivalent. The yellow line is tracking a bit above its historical equivalent. If we flipped onto the access button, it doesn't change much. So again, now that you've got moisture in the soil, there's nothing in this forecast where I'm saying, geez, I need to go out and make some radical decisions. And I think for
interrupt?
Yeah, certainly.
Sorry, this is Tani. I just have a question. Because I'm fairly new to this, so I'm sorry if anybody that finds this tedious. So the modelled growth rate is based on if you have your paddocks stocked. Is that what you said earlier, Phil? If you've got stock on those paddocks, you can still expect to get 20 kilos per hectare per day.
The growth rate is the rate at which the actual plant is growing.
And that's regardless of whether that plant's having an animal eat it at the time or not?
The leaf area index is having some influence, but you won't see that 20 kilos because stock are consuming some of it. If the paddock was shut up, that's the rate at which you would expect the paddock to be growing over the last 7 days.
Okay, I understand. And that, so just to clarify, my understanding, Lindsay does a bit of rotational grazing. Is that different to anybody that sets stock? Would that?
Yeah, look, in the model, we can rotationally graze, but that just increases the size of output. So with what we can only do on Farming Forecaster, it's that the paddock is set stocked. So what we're providing, say for Lindsay, is rotationally grazing, we're providing an average of what's occurring over his farms. So we'll have less feed in than the paddocks that are shut up, but we might have more feed than some of the paddocks that have just been grazed. It's sort of this mythical average across the farm.
Yeah, and is that, sorry, last question, is that important? Like that, is that history reflected as well?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Oh, that's all right. I was just wondering, no, I understand that it's a mythical average, and I think that applies historically as well.
Oh, yes, historically for everything. Everything, the history and the forecast is exactly the same farm system, same stocking rate, same pastures, same soil type. One is historical data, and one is a forecast of where we think things might go. But it's all based on the same grazing both sides.
Thank you.
Thanks for your question. And again, I just recommend that you just duck onto the site and look at some of those little YouTube ones. In the Matt Lechsky did a good job putting them together. They just help you just understand it, and it just takes a while to get your head around it. It was interesting. We did a webinar the East Coast this morning, and even some of the producers there who have most likely been looking at this for 2 years, there's still things they're picking up now. So the more you look at it, the more you start getting out of it. So again, my summary of that scenario was quite positive. Well, this is now there's a number of pieces of information. There's a lot more information available on the website than what I'm showing today. And there's one of the other ones, because at present the moisture probe at Lewisham isn't being displayed. If I just go down under the more pasture detail, there's a little graph here of current soil moisture, how it compares to history. So the red dot is where the site is now. The box plot is the last 30 years. So the red dot is above the line. So within the box is 15 years of data. There's 7 years below, 7 years above in the whiskers, as it's called. And the middle point, medium point's where that line is. So what it's really saying is, and in the model, the soil moisture is sitting somewhere between the middle and the top. You've got to remember, this is historically a dry time for this site. You can't interpret that as saying, geez, we've got a lot of moisture. What you can interpret it is, for this time of year, which historically were dry, we're a little bit less dry than we have been in previous years. Thanks, Tim. We're now down to Chris's site, a bit further down. Chris, you've had a little bit more rain than Lindsay, but nothing brilliant. According to my records, you're sitting on about 98 mils. But things have just kicked away. Your black line's already started tracking up, and that will continue. And if my expectation is that after the next 7 days, your black line will be running parallel to the yellow line. So that's a real positive. And again, really, there's nothing radically different I can say to what I've said before. If we look at where the coloured lines sit to their relative, the red line's tracking above its historical position, the yellow line's tracking above its historical position, the 90% sitting on top of it. The one thing I think I can say with a fair degree of confidence, I think we could almost stop showing the 90-degree line. And in fact, when I go onto the site now, I just tend to look on the 10, the 25 and the 50. But everyone will display it. And if we look up in the growth, 26 kilos a day, which would have been occurring earlier in the month. And with your added moisture, I think that'll just continue. So again, that's an outlook to me, which I'm comfortable about. Any comments, Chris? Are you feeling comfortable?
Hang on. Yeah, feeling comfortable. We've had 25 mils in 7 days, so that's spot on for our critical rainfall period to get a good rain.
Yeah, look, down here in Tassie, you're exactly the same as us in the Southern Tablelands, except we most likely got our rain event 10 days earlier than you people did. You know, at the 1st of April, it had all the hallmarks of looking pretty like things could go pear-shaped quite quickly. But then we just got a fantastic break and we're up and away. And really, I see the same happening here, but just a fraction later. And I still see a lot of growth. My view is, again from the Southern Tablelands, and we have a bit more altitude. You know, we're 600 and 700 metres. But the growth we get in June now is far, far different from what we used to get 20 years ago. So I tend to regard autumn to some degree now as being April, May, June, and summer ends in March. The last couple of days of March, we had 2 days over 40 and 2 days over 35, 4 days in a row. So it was almost our hottest spell. So I still think we've got good growth ahead of us. For at least 6 or 7 weeks. Next one, please, Tim. All righty, just to pull up a different one, again, still on the same property. It's if we go down further on the more pasture one, we get a comment, a graph down the bottom, which is looking at what's the risk of us having to do supplementary feeding. And I just thought I'd put this up. I don't think it's one we've ever really talked about before. So there's 2 lines representing the adult stock and the young stock, 2 different colours. And how do you look? So it's a percentage up the left-hand side, and the bottom across, the amounts across the bottom is the amount of grain you might have to feed per head for the 4-month period. Right, so it's for the 4-month period. So if you really look at the lines come down, you know, at zero, the lines don't appear off the zero thing till we get below 40%. So another way of looking at that is there's a 60% chance in the next 4 months you won't have to do any feeding. For the adult stock, for the young stock, there's an 80% chance. It's saying that there's about a 3% chance that you might have to feed 17 kilos. Could you just go back to the slide before, please, Tim? The pasture slide. Just a reminder, the red line down the bottom of that red forecast line, that's the 10% line. So there's actually 2 years of data where food conditions could be lower than that. We don't show you, but in that feed graph at the end, we pick up those sort of years. So the events that could have caused that feeding to occur are ones that we don't even show you. So it's a more, if you like, it's a more severe look at the future than this graph, because it's dealing with those years we don't want to put anything there. But still, what do I take out of that? You can move on, thanks, Tim. What do I take out of that feeding graph? It sort of backs up what we've really been saying about the forecast, is that the chances of us having to do something are exceptionally low. And would I look at that and make any decisions? No, I'm not. The percentages are far too low to even worry about it. I really only put it up because I thought I'll start showing a few different graphs, because at some stage, unfortunately, we're going to have to look at this graph and we're going to use this information to make some decisions. Next one, please. And the last one is the site up at Stonehouse. Not that far from Chris, but it moves east, and we see this trend we've seen in Tassie for a number of years now, that as you move east, you've picked up rainfall. So Ben and Beck have nearly doubled your rainfall, Chris, in that same period. They've been chewing through a bit of things were starting to dry out, so that's why that black line was dropping. But now it's tended to flatline, and again with the extra moisture they've just had, I'd expect the black line to in fact come up above the yellow line. So again, in summary, a fairly relaxed forecast. Growth rate isn't as high at this site, it's down, and that's partly new pastures coming away will grow with a bit more vigour. We're a bit higher here, and we're certainly higher, and we're a bit cooler. So other than Rob's site, which is now looking more positive than it did a week ago, all the other sites I think are sitting in pretty comfortable positions. Rob really needs to keep pulling some of that moisture around from other people and putting on his place to keep him going. So he's got moisture to drive things forward, but I wouldn't be confident that there's enough moisture there to keep. He needs follow-up rain to keep that going. It's a big improvement of where it was, but it needs follow-up. The rest of you aren't anywhere. The follow-up isn't anywhere near as important. And the great advantage of what's just happened is any rainfall event now, you know, a 3 or 4 or 5 mil rainfall event's going to be beneficial to you. Until that rain came, a 5 mil rainfall event was useless to you. You've now got over that hump. Those small rainfall events will keep that topsoil moist, keep things going. To me, the next real big decision point is, let's see when the June forecast comes out about what the Access S is saying. The BOM have made some pretty negative comments about the spring. I find that a bit funny because it's very early in the year to make that comment. But let's see come June whether that's starting to give us some clues about what spring might be like if it's heading in the wrong direction. So that's my summary of the current situation, Tim. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I'm just going to stop sharing so you don't have to see that. Yeah, thanks very much. So I might open it up to a few questions. I was just wondering we've spoken to a few people about their sites. I don't know if Rob, I don't know if you had any comments, considering the fact that your site, the forecast on your site is slightly different. Did you want to make any comment about that? What you're seeing?
Other than the fact that I just got back from Northern Victoria and been up there for a fortnight, and when I left, it was starting to look a little bit iffy, and now it looks really, really good. So,
Great.
We're certainly not feeling like we're under any pressure or anything like that.
No.
So, no, we're very comfortable. I just that site's deliberately in a fairly dry type of, right in the middle of the farm, and it probably doesn't get as much rain as other areas. But no, I don't know. It's probably telling us what we need to know, but I think it's probably a little bit conservative. We feel very comfortable.
Yeah.
And we're probably stocked higher than we've ever been right at the moment. So, and we're still feeling really comfortable. So,
yeah.
I don't know what else to say to that other than probably need to have a bit better look around.
Yep. Yeah,
Well,
right.
I think,
Thanks, Rob. Yep.
Rob, I think you just raised a very important point, is that, you've got size, you are going to get variation in rainfall across the place. You've just got to come to grips with is how this site and the forecasts then relate to the rest of it. And maybe you've already summed that up as saying, well, this is most likely at a more negative position. So I can look at that. This is more negative, so I'm this much better. And for other people, it might be below where I'm at. So none of whatever we do will never fully cover your place, but it gives us a consistent benchmark. And then you look at that and you say, well, I can add 10 or 20% on, or I take 10 or 20% off. You develop how your place is tracking against the benchmark, and then the benchmark is giving you something consistent over time, which is the value I see.
No, that's fair, but I'd also just, what John said earlier is pretty pertinent too. I understand what you're saying about the way the graph's produced, but as soon as you look at that graph, your eyes divert straight to the left, and you look at the average cover, and we're way over the top of that. So you sort of you second guess that graph almost straight away. I understand how it's produced. I understand that all that, but it does take, every time I look at it, it takes me a couple of minutes to get my head around it again.
Yeah. No, look, we're certainly doing work right at present to try and fix it. I would find it a lot easier if we had it a bit better on. I suppose if anything I could say straight away with you, if you've gone look at the figure at the left, look at the figure at the left and add 300. Right? So, and just remember what we're dealing with is grazed dryland country. So when you've got a property where you've got a lot of variation over it, you're looking at those. You've got to make sure you benchmark against the right paddocks on your place to stack up with it. But anyhow, we won't go on with that.
The other thing that we've got, and probably a lot of the Midlands guys have got as well, is we're grazing stubbles, and we've got all our highland country that's ungrazed, and we've got all that part of the farm we have, that's not actually modelled into this. So
correct.
That throws us out a lot as well. Gets us, not such a true figure of what's actually happening on the ground. So we've got to be very careful with that here, or not very careful, but just understand that is not modelled in there.
Yes, spot on. We've just got that country's just under a constant stocking rate the whole time. So I think, Rob, we have talked about that before, whether that stocking rate is on your dryland countries is right. I think once up in the valley, you thought, oh, geez, maybe it's a bit high, and that's maybe if on the dryland country that stocking rate dropped a bit, obviously that black line would look better.
That 12.5 is way too high, but that's trying to compensate with some of that what we were just talking about. So,
Yep, but bear in mind at some point down the track, if you think that you want that readjusted, that is a possibility.
yeah, the reason it's high though is so that we realistically start making decisions to send cows to the high country and start feeding. So it's telling us what we need to know, but it isn't quite correct, if that makes sense.
Fully understand, and to me, the critical thing is your understanding how to use this in relation to your complex operation, and it's giving you an indicator. It's not giving you the answer.
Yeah, no worries.
Thanks for your comments.
Thanks, Rob. Does anybody else have any questions or comments about their sites or anything about the Farming Forecaster project?
Yes, I've got a small one.
Yes.
We're getting a lot of sites now, which is fantastic. But is there any way that you can put a default on the site that you want to go to? Benham's